There ain't no superheroes to save the day in the world of the streets, baby. It's all up to you to take on the role for yourselves.
Representation is described as the description or portrayal of someone or something in a particular way or as being of a certain nature. It has become more prominent as time progressed. Media has tried to have some sort of representation of all kinds of people from many different backgrounds and cultures. It's no different in video games. As a kid back then, I never really thought about the abundance of black characters that I would see or didn't see in games, movies, music, or in television. But seeing media that's related to my culture and as a person of color, I gravitated towards it, and it's all helped shape me as a person, whether it involves my mannerisms, my speech, and what I enjoy. Video games have a number of black characters that I've really grown attached to and have grown up with. Street Fighter has Balrog, Dudley, and newcomer Kimberly. Tekken has Eddie Gordo, Christy Montero, and Bruce Irving. Carl Johnson from GTA San Andreas. Rodon from Bayonetta, Barrett from Final Fantasy VII, Jax from Mortal Kombat, and Marina in Splatoon. All characters I've grown to really love. On TV, I watch shows related to my people such as Family Matters, The Boondocks, and Everybody Hates Chris. Rap music and R&B are my main genres of music that I listen to, and it's all thanks to the community and culture I've grown up with. All of these aspects of my life resonated with me. So, how does this all relate back to Jet Set Radio? For such an old franchise, I'd say Jet Set Radio's black representation is very strong with its featured characters. Jet Set Radio has 5 black main characters: Combo, Garam, Piranha / Boogie, Jazz, and the heart and soul of the franchise, DJ Professor K. In the GGs, a quarter of the members are black. They all look equally as flashy and as stylistic with the rest of the gang. For me, this matters a lot because I get to see people closer to me be able to do all these super cool things in game. It was because of my dad that I even got into this franchise in the first place. The black characters in Jet Set Radio really stood out to him and they were amongst his favorite. Starting with Combo, in the OG game, he's an essential character just like Cube in Chapter 2. I won't reiterate the story like I did in the Cube video, but all you need to know is that he was the leader of a gang with Cube and Corn, and after having to deal with the Rhinos, he goes to Tokyo to enlist help from the GGs. Also, isn't it cool that their names all start with C? Combo is one of the few characters in the game that actually has full voices of dialogue. That alone makes him the most important character over a lot of the other members of the GGs.
Grind City, my turf. My name's Combo, and me, Cube, and Corn used to own the Bantam Street area in this city. It's a little far from Tokyo, but everyone used to stay out of our way there. Till recently, that is. Someone been going around painting these ugly signs all over Grind City. It's so ugly I can't even call it graffiti. Strange paintings of rhinos and bizarre symbols.
Combo is seen as the oldest member of the GGs and he stands at 6'4", still only second to another certain giant in the GGs. Combo's design is more reminiscent of 80s and early 90s style of clothing rappers wore back in the day. Combo is a man of marvelous talents. Homie is carrying this boombox around his arms doing all sorts of tricks, spraying graffiti and jamming at the same time. Never gets tired and always keeps it intact. You wouldn't want to make him mad before he slams you with his stereo like he's swinging a chair on some WWE type beat.
Wait! That's it, he said.
Damn! He ain't gonna be in Rush Hour 3.
He's also in Sega Superstars Tennis as a cameo in the Jet Set Radio stage as part of Beat's All-Star move, and the Superstar Mode minigame where you smack him across the face with a tennis ball. In Jet Set Radio Future, Combo is the secondary mandatory character you recruit. After having a run-in with Poison Jam and Shibuya Terminal, Combo comes in to see all the graffiti on his turf and assumes you're responsible for messing it up. So he threatens you, or semi-flirts with you if you're playing with gum, and challenges you to the hardest challenge in the game. Once Poison Jam shows up again, Combo realizes they were the one who messed up the bus terminal, apologizes, and then joins the GGs. Combo goes through a pretty significant redesign. Combo's style is more styled after mid-90s to early 2000s hip-hop fashion when things started to lean to a more aggressive and gritty side of rap. His voice is much deeper in Future compared to his former voice, which also reflects his new change of style.
Yo, kid.
Since Combo is one of the earlier recruitments in the game, you get more interactions with him to get an idea of what kind of character he is. Combo has a tough persona and is usually no nonsense for a lot of his interactions. You also learn that he's not a fan of dogs when he sees pots in the garage, but there's one thing he hates more than dogs. Goldfish. This is definitely up there as the strangest thing to learn about any character in this game. Maybe he's allergic to goldfish or something? I don't know. The thought of this man having a vendetta against animals is too funny. When he's not being the tough guy, he's pretty level-headed and chill. Combo is a very beloved character, not only rocking the styles that represented hip-hop during those time frames, but him carrying that boombox I saw as him carrying the spirit of hip-hop as well. Garam is the most eccentric character amongst the GGs, even more eccentric than Yo-Yo. Garam is most recognized for his loud and raspy voice. In both the OG game and in Future, he is a fellow resident of the sewers. The manual for the OG game describes him as being short-tempered and loves to get into fights. We could definitely see some sense of this with how aggressive he is towards the Immortals and Clutch, especially wanting to take on Clutch one-on-one in a fight. He's always excited to jump into action. Both Garam and Yo-Yo share the trait of being a troublemaker, which is why people love having these two together as a dynamic duo. Especially with the line of Garam saying that he caused trouble for both him and Yo-Yo when he got kidnapped. The funniest thing about Garam to me is that he has different reactions to Boogie and Jazz. With his interaction with Boogie, he tries to play it off as he's the top dog, but when he meets Jazz, that man is starstruck. Garam's trademark is his Bumblebee hexagon style goggles. He's the only character in the OG game that is just out here skating shirtless and in shorts. I know the sewers gotta be freezing in there, especially with the ice around his neck. Also, nice tramp stamp you got there, homie. In Future, he decided to finally put on some more clothing, and Garam didn't really go through a massive redesign in Future, not like our next fella Rudy here. Piranha, Boogie, Sugar, whatever you want to call her. When it came to Future redesigns, while there were drastic changes, characters always carry the trait from their OG design to be in their Future design. Not our girl Sugar over here. These are two completely different characters sharing similar identities. The thing that's been pretty unanimous within the Jet Set Radio community is that they love Piranha and absolutely dislike Boogie, even outright saying that Boogie is pretty ugly and a downgrade. But why? Is it the forehead? I mean, yeah, she does have quite the 5 head, looking like Super Saiyan 3 Goku with her hairline, but I think it's a little blown out of proportion. The drastic change in design reflects the changes in the characters' personalities as well. When you see Piranha's more sporty attire, the thick braids, and the energetic sassy voice, she's a lot more outgoing looking as a character.
You bet!
Boogie, in comparison, is a lot more chill and relaxed looking, with the color scheme of her outfit matching a sunset look. Her blonde braids are tied, and a much softer and lower toned voice that she has. I think what really makes her show her more chilled personality in Future is through her idol dance animations. The way she moves her hips, her arm movements, just the subtle things show what kind of character Boogie is like. She's also the only character that calls out the GGs on being crazy on what they're doing, and is seen to be very nervous when the conflict starts getting real dangerous. Whether you see her as Piranha or Boogie, there's no denying that she's one groovy gal. Then we have Jazz, one of the new characters debuting in Future. You meet her after she's been snatched by the noise tanks as they think she's part of the GGs, and then you two are forced to play the most boring section in the entire game. But after that, you get to challenge her to a race, and then you can recruit her to the team. Jazz instantly stands out amongst the other Rudies as she's the most casually dressed of them all. Very covered up with the long sleeve shirt only having a little bit of belly out, the big old baggy pants, the black gloves, and she comes with her own trademark for her design, the plaid scarf. You're so used to seeing tons of characters with their eccentric designs, and then Jazz come in and shows that you can rock the most everyday looking outfit as a Rudy and still be cool. Unfortunately though, for Jazz, she's not very popular in comparison to her peers. Not that there's anything wrong with her, she's just forgotten. Most of the folks in the Jet Set Radio The community usually stick to the OG designs, leaving Future on the wayside with Jazz being forgotten with it. Which is a darn shame because she has one of the most unique designs and she's fairly cool as a character on her own. She's very spunky, energetic, but has some hints of being very wise. She has one of the best interaction lines of the game, stating, "It's always the loners who resort to fear and violence as a way to get people to listen." I can't talk about Jet Set Radio without the voice of Jet Set Radio himself, the almighty DJ Professor K. He is the final piece of the mascot trio of the series. He's an integral part of Jet Set Radio. He's your storyteller, your navigator, your DJ, and an assistant arson.
Let's go to the mailbag. A letter from Mr. Osaki asks,
How do I get rid of these nasty roaches?
easy, just burn your house down. We got another letter from Osaki. He says,
I burned my house down. What should I do now?
how should I know, fool?
You know the 4 elements of hip-hop: DJing, dance breaking, graffiti, and the MC. DJ K is part of that element. Those banger songs you hear from Jet Set Radio, it's him playing those mixes from the underground studio canonically. From his iconic wacky design and amazing voice performance from Billy Brown, DJ Professor K provides the most colorful personality that Jet Set Radio is praised for.
My signal is fading quick. Who the hell are you, sucker? Help me! Hey, don't touch that! Get your hands up! Stop! That's my stuff! Sucker, I'm warning you! Get off! Get out! Don't make me come out! Help me! Hey, listen up! The Golden Rhinos are here! They in here! Listen up, fools! I'm gonna keep broadcasting as long as I can! The Golden Rhinos brought in some sort of strange-looking machine! What is that thing? Shut that damn thing off!
Even in the Sega crossover games, he comes along with Beat and Gum to represent the series. It's a damn shame he's never been playable in the Jet Set Radio game. Okay, he's playable in the GBA version of the OG game, but I would simply like to forget that.
Hey, RS, don't worry about it, dude. I've totally got you covered. I've played through this whole game. I can get you some footage of DJK. Yeah, it's not as cool as you think it would be. Yeah, I guess if you want to see more of it, youtube.com/falseproof. Okay. I don't know how to say words.
Thank you, FalseProof. You are my GOAT, because I was not gonna play that boo-boo ass port myself.
Alright, so boom. If you've listened to a lot of the soundtracks Sega produced in their heyday, you'd eventually notice they took a lot of influence from not just J-pop, but Western pop music as well, especially rap, R&B, and house, genres created by and associated with black artists. While they weren't the first to do so, shout out to Capcom, Sega was pretty much at the forefront for the majority of their existence as a first party. Tojima Earl's characters were a send-up of hip-hop culture at the time. Masato Nakamura took influence from Bobby Brown and Prince when making the soundtracks of Sonic 1 and 2, not to mention his love of Motown, and of course Yuzo Koshiro sampled a lot of black musicians in the works of Streets of Rage, including Public Enemy, Ice-T, Soda Soul, and so on and so forth. And of course, Michael Jackson was on the Sega payroll for about 12 years doing stuff for Sonic the Hedgehog, Space Channel 5, and etc.
There was also them Hunted P and Dread Fox, but they're irrelevant.
Hey yo, chill before Honey comes after us next.
You know what? I don't even give a fuck about them niggas, bro. They kissed my ass for all I got.
Anyway, Sega was also pretty heavy on sampling of some of the soundtracks at the time. For example, DD Crew. They used a lot of Prince and James Brown samples at a time right before sampling like that became illegal. This is the same year the game came out. Bismarcky lost a lawsuit for sampling Gilbert O'Sullivan's Alone Again Naturally, which changed the face of hip-hop and a lot of house music as well. And of course, video games weren't as heavily scrutinized as they are now, but yeah, you still had to be careful. For example, Sonic CD, that had so many funk, soul, and techno samples that Sega of America, they were like, we can't touch the soundtrack, we're gonna get sued. And they didn't want to clear the samples either, so they got Spencer Nielsen to redo the soundtrack, which is why you have the Japanese versus American soundtrack war still going on today, which is kind of stupid because Japanese soundtrack is the best, no, just plain. But anyway, Sega would continue sampling it into the Dreamcast era, and they would still be influenced heavily by a lot of black music. Space Channel 5 was influenced by a lot of disco. Nights in the Dream, Shenmue and Rez all took varying degrees of influence from jazz, soul, rap, house, and so on. And it will pave the way for how GSR's soundtrack would take shape. As far as licensed music goes, there's only one black music act to ever get licensed for their games, and that was Jurassic 5 with Improvise. Granted, technically rocking the mic by Prunes, the rapper on there, freestyle, he was a black dude, but some wouldn't count that because the main artist is the Prunes, and they're all like, I think they're Swedish or Danish or whatever. I'm not 100% sure. But either way, Hideki and the rest of the crew on the soundtrack captured the sound well for Jet Set Radio. Now let's get this out the way right quick. The Jet Set Radio series pulls from skater culture in general. There ain't no denying that. My colleagues wouldn't disagree. It's a series that follows in the footsteps of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater as well as the greater skateboarder culture beyond that, even though Jet Set Radio focuses more on rollerblades. But while not directly overlapping, the foundations of hip-hop and skater culture have some similarities. They were created as a new form of activity and art, they're often portrayed and promoted as anti-authoritarian, and they have a heavy emphasis on graffiti as part of the culture, and they became an extremely popular and enduring part of the mainstream, even though the establishment frequently turned their collective nose up at it, not claiming that they wouldn't last. But a good deal of Jet Set Radio style and aesthetic and sound can be traced to many aspects of not just North American black culture, but across the African diaspora. One example you might not be aware of is Rudy. That's a variation of Rude Boy, classic Jamaica slang man. Rude Boy, Rudy, and his variants originated from Kingston, specifically the poor sections of Jamaica's capital, and it was associated with the many poor and angry young folks of those areas back in the 1960s, not long after Jamaica became independent from the United Kingdom. Many young brothers went to Jamaica for work and other opportunities. When it became clear nothing was popping, that's when they started wilding out over there. And unlike the streetwear the majority of the GSR gangs wear, and most of the gangs of today in general, the original Rudies, they took inspiration from the USA's jazz scene. They were wearing suits, ties, fedoras, looking all sharp and stuff, and that was part of their image. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say they looked more like the Golden Rhinos, but I digress. Many Rudies also found on and off employment with sound systems, crews of DJs, MCs, and sound engineers playing ska, reggae, and rocksteady music. Many of these crews would go around to disrupt rival sound systems dances, which inevitably led to big fights and the coining of the term dancehall crasher. There's a lot more I could go on about it, but we'd be here for about a week. Anyway, the Rudy culture eventually found its way to the United Kingdom through the Jamaican immigrants, and it would influence urban fashion and music in the UK, and it would pave the way for the creation of drum and bass, grime, jungle, two-step, dubstep, and garage music. Genres that will eventually appear in the music of Jet Set Radio. Even tracks like Bulk Fresh use ragga samples to add to the series' rude boy charm. Another aspect of hip-hop culture embraced by Jet Set Radio is graffiti and breakdancing. Graffiti in its many forms predates hip-hop and skating by centuries, if not millennia, but modern graffiti is strongly associated with those cultures and black culture in general. The roots of it, from a black perspective, can be traced back to the subway trains of Philadelphia and New York City in the 1970s. And that would not only become one of the four core elements of hip-hop alongside actually rapping and DJing and breakdancing, but also eventually made its way over to skater culture as well, though skater culture mostly drew from the punk rock scene, which developed its own style of graffiti around the same time. Like rap and punk rock, graffiti was seen as anti-authoritarian, vandalistic, and often gang-related because gangs take their territory with graffiti tags. But many others used it to express themselves because there was simply no other way. In the inner city, there were no arts programs for the youth because the government cut the funding, so they went ahead and made something out of nothing by spraying art on the walls and rapping over disco loops, and that's how hip-hop got started. And then you see something similar in the original Jet Set Radio and in Future. The government suppresses free expression and creativity to a ridiculous degree, so the youth take to the streets and they begin expressing themselves with their graffiti and dance, though often it comes at the cost of private property, which gets the cops on them. And of course, it goes without saying that while graffiti is a legitimate art form, just straight up dousing somebody's property and paint without permission is illegal and usually a dick move. But that was the only way to do it back then. And while the cops usually hate graffiti, they usually won't maul and shoot anybody over it like they do in the games. Ah, who am I kidding? They'll look for any excuse to shoot his niggas up. Having that said, some legendary graph artists went on to parlay their skills in illegal graffiti art, or even now other styles of visual art. John Michael Basquiat, Joseph Don D. White, and Lady Pink are just a few graffiti artists who parlayed their street skills into great success in the art world. On the breakdancing, whether it's b-boying, pop locking, or Chicago footwork, that all came from the streets in the 1970s, like other elements of hip-hop. Part of this is because while dance studios wouldn't let Black and Latino kids within 50 feet of the doors, those same kids held block parties on the street or went to the other open spaces they could find, like warehouses, parks, even schoolyards, because they wasn't gonna let that stop them. And depending on what area you were living in, you had different styles of breakdancing. For example, California, they had the pop lock going on and everything, while New York, specifically the Bronx, which is where hip-hop got started, they innovated the moves they associate with breakdancing all over the world, like flares, head spins, windmills, up rock, down rock, and so on. In Jet Set Radio, you don't see too many characters doing any power moves, but most of them are pretty nice, the up rock and down rock, except for Rakaku. That old man dances like he's shadow boxing and somehow losing against his own shadow. And of course, there's the DJ. From the early days of Jamaican sound systems to modern rap, the DJ is one of the most important parts of black music. And since we got a resident DJ in here, it's only fair to let Shadow hop on for this part. Go ahead, my DJ.
Much respect, V. When it comes to DJs, whether it be blending tunes together or just saying some wild shit on the mic to get the place hype, they're a crucial part of taste making, sound selection, and overall entertainment. Jamaican sound systems in the 1950s, influenced by black radio DJs in America, would talk jive over music as they played and selected R&B soul hits. This slowly evolved into what has become known as toasting, and would be a big influence on American hip-hop, both for the rapper and the DJ. Kid Capri, Funkmaster Flex, and DJ Drama are legendary for their energy and loud voices, keeping the place and the people hype between tracks during their DJ sets, or in the case of Funk Flex, shouting his hot takes into the mic at the top of his lungs on Hot 97 while dropping obnoxious bomb sounds throughout.
You see me, I'm here, New York!
And of course, ain't nobody bigger than DJ Professor K. Essentially a combo of various over-the-top American radio and DJ personalities, Professor K not only mixes the soundtrack you hear in-game, but he's literally tuned into the streets and knows all about the going-ons with Tokyo's various gangs, as well as Rokaku and his cronies. Back in the 90s, and even a good chunk of the early 2000s, even into the mids, if a DJ wanted to know what was going on in the streets, they had to keep an ear to the streets, and Professor K is a good example of that. The first game took a step further by explicitly showing one of his informants on screen, and in future, he's seemingly able to see most of the action in real time, implying he has some form of access to Tokyo's CCTV system. This man has eyes and ears are literally all over the streets and the sewers. And both the characters and the player get news from him in real time. When Rokaku is about to send a squad your way, he plays an audio from a police scanner over the airwaves, and even knows if the tanks or helicopters are coming your way. Professor K may not have the influence to stop Rokaku himself, but he's looking out for all the Rudies on the streets, most of whom are just kids trying to express themselves. Know what I mean?
All in all, the Jet Set Radio series is not only a reflection of skater culture of the time, but also pulls from various aspects of black culture as well. And while some could argue that there's games out there that incorporate it better, there's few games out there like Jet Set Radio that embrace it the way it does. I mean, there's like Getting Up, Contents Under Pressure, but that doesn't quite compare to Jet Set Radio. It does its own thing with the graffiti thing and like anti-authority and stuff, which is pretty cool, but Jet Set Radio's in its own box, and I don't think there's like any game that can like compare to it the way it embraces all the elements of hip-hop and various parts of black culture. That's how I see it anyway.
Four elements. There's DJing, there's breaking, there's graffiti, and then there's the MC.
You'd think you'd not have a JSR video talking about connections to black culture and not bring up that banging ass soundtrack? Let me break it down for you.
The most important part of dance is music. So now let us identify the beats.
JSR sound takes from everything, basically. When Hideki Naganuma was at work with the soundtrack, the mainstream music scene of the late 90s and early Y2K was probably the most diverse time for different and new sounds to emerge. Nu metal was all over the place with Korn and Limp Bizkit. Fatboy Slim was showing how sampling was a true art form with Big Beat. Electronic music was reaching new heights with acts like The Prodigy, The Chemical Brothers, Aphex Twin, etc. And hip-hop was in its so-called shiny suit era, with acts and producers like Timbaland, The Neptunes, Missy Elliott, Sierra, and a many slew of others. But there were also still loads of alternative rap talent to appeal to the underground fans as well. Hideki was influenced by all, if not a good chunk of this sound, especially Fatboy Slim and the Chemical Brothers on the first game's soundtrack, and it still holds up to many fans of the game series to this day.
To this day!
And is considered a masterpiece to a lot of musicians like myself who got into the game from it. For example, Let Mom Sleep uses samples from old British TV shows as main vocals. That's Enough takes from well-known funk and hip-hop records. Moody Shuffle and Funky Radio are the epitome of old-school boom bap done with rock and soulful undertones. And many others out of the box can be named. Hideki was a sample god. Compare him to that of MK, or Mark Kinchin as he's called, most famous for making the remix of Nightcrawler's Push the Feeling On, or Todd Edwards. Taking vocal and melodic samples while it's chopping and manipulating them to make a brand new composition. There were loops that were more than likely bought by Sega for Hideki to use to his will. Things like Skip to My Loops, Ecstatic Goldmine, Zero G Data Files, Ubershaw Big Beat, AMG Now, and Future Music, just to name a few. Hideki also brought on a good chunk of people to work on this game's soundtrack in between doing the musical direction. Richard Jacques, the composer behind those cheesy Eurohouse Sonic Saturn tracks, and Metropolis Street Racer, was brought on to help compose some of the music as well. His most famous being Everybody Jumped Around. At its core, it's a reinterpolation of House of Pain's track of the same name from 1992, a hip-hop classic if you ask me.
Jump around! Jump up, and get down! Jump!
Or in the case of JSRF, What About the Future? A hodgepodge of chemicals and instrumental prodigies that'll sure to rattle your mind, body, and soul as if you were on ecstasy. Don't do drugs, kids. Another composer brought on by Hideki I like to mention is Toronto, or Tomonori Sawada, who would later go on to produce games such as Sega Rally, Panzer Dragoon, and Sonic Riders. Yes, Sonic Riders, the GOAT. Although he has been with Sega since 1992 when working on Sonic 2's Master System soundtrack, his only full-length track on JSR, Electric Toothbrush, is regarded by fans to have that staple Y2K house sound, which I can agree with. This one being a huge influence from acts like Daft Punk, Basement Jaxx, Armand van Helden, Masters at Work, and many other house acts of the 90s and 2000s. Sawada was mainly influenced by that of the EDM scene in Japan at the time, from drum and bass and breakbeat to techno and house. You'll hear his style just by his sure way of mixing and creativity. Now I bet you're asking yourself,
what the hell does that have to do with black culture?
let me get to that, damn it.
Pay attention.
JSR sound is indefinitely black music to its core. Hideki himself acknowledges black music as an influence to his sound, saying in an interview that he enjoyed artists and musicians that did it all. Writing, arranging, performing, and producing full-length albums. Artists such as Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, to a degree, and my iconic influence, Prince. Hideki enjoyed a lot of this sound so much, he would eventually get a job in his middle school days to save up money and get equipment to compose music similar to what his influencers' styles was. Making music using dolls, samplers, and sequencers, trackers as well, Hideki learned the art of sampling through the lens, old school style. At the age of 15, he composed his first original track, My Girl, for a nationwide contest called Mr. Nice Guy.
That shouldn't be taken as lightly now.
Fast forward a bit, Hideki was hungry to give this new sound to fresh ears, doing what a lot of rappers and DJs did back in that day, demo shopping. Eventually landing him a DJ gig at a local radio show.
Factual evidence.
And also eventually getting him scouted by an A&R from SME and almost getting signed as an independent J-pop artist. Unfortunately, Hideki became very dissatisfied with the J-pop sound and went into making game and film music. After working as a bartender at Blue Note in Tokyo, he would end up applying for Sega in 1997 and would instantly get hired. Soon afterwards, he would start working on what would be his magnum opus for decades to come, Jet Set Radio. Granted, talking about black culture comes as no surprise when you take into the consideration what the theme for JSRF samples anyways.
We do not understand the thing, understand the concept, understand the thing, understand the concept of love. Understand the thing, understand the concept, understand the concept of love.
Yes, it goes without saying. Everyone should know what the concept of love's main vocal riff is sampled from. An audio recorded, taken from the voice of Stokely Carmichael in a Black Panther Party rally to free Huey Newton from prison in 1968. While most of the soundtrack is varied
and biased to mostly big breakbeat music,
the black music that stands out in the soundtrack is what solidifies it as a gold standard amongst many VGM composers and producers getting into or already in that genre of games and style. Lethal League Blaze, Sonic Rush, Sonic Riders, Slap Happy Rhythm Busters, Street Fighter 3 Second Impact, Third Strike, Ridge Racer Type 4, and Bomb Rush Cyberfunk are great examples of how much JSR's musical soundtrack style shaped its representation on both before the game and even after. It also shows how good a soundtrack can be done when you add a little 12 herbs and spices, Cajun seasoning, salt, pepper, and some hot sauce in the mix. And as a DJ, producer, writer, and a black man myself, I love how JSR did it. Both 99 Street Bounce and Boogie Down Bantam are love letters to that sound.
That's what's up.